Let me give you some fascinating examples. We're going to switch gears a little bit of the information. Remember, I told you the genome is a code. It's a computer program. And in fact, as we're learning more and more, it's a much more complicated computer program. Initially, when scientists discovered DNA, since Watson and Crick and so on, very soon they were sure that they understand the program. It's very simple. Here's a piece of code that starts here and then it ends there. And it's only used in a certain direction. So once you have a direction that gives you the order of amino acids in a protein, DNA to RNA to protein, they come up with a very simple model, but in reality, the model is much more complex. In reality, the information content is there, but how exactly it's used, we don't know. So there's a phenomenal study by Mikhail Medvedev and a couple of other people. They use computer science to analyze genomes. The question should be asked is, we look at two creatures, right? A fruit fly and a nematode. A nematode is a very, very simple creature compared to a fruit fly. A fruit fly is much more sophisticated. Yet, they have the same genome size. Very, very similar. Why? That doesn't directly address the questions that I've raised before, but I think it's a very interesting point to understand how sophisticated the system is. Genome is not like a linear thing that just works in sequence. It could be very, very complicated. Depending on what you pack in there, it could act very differently. So notice that there's something called information content. And information content, in this case, these programmers took the genomes and they used methods from computer science to estimate the information content of a genome. It's pretty fascinating. Think about it this way, like, why did the methods of computer science work on a genome? It shouldn't work. It's like, those are different worlds. This is real world biology. This is something we made up to actually, do some useful things on the computer. In fact, it explains many things. So if you use information content as defined by computer science, you can explain this, right? Yes, the genome size is the same, but the information packed into the genome is very, very different. Fruit fly has almost 5 times more information. Really, really fascinating. Here's another example. Zebrafish versus pufferfish. In this case, zebrafish, this is not so obvious, by the way. Zebrafish is a little bit, it's like 3.5 times, whatever, more larger genome size, but it's 9 times more information content. Why? They're both fishes. Well, the answer lies on the fact that a pufferfish has a much simpler habitat, much simpler habits. And here's we're getting into some very interesting things, because it's one thing when you look at the body plan, you can see the fins, you can see the eyes, you can see the fish, but what we're not realizing is that there's also various behavioral things that animals do. And those behavioral things are also clearly genomic, and we don't understand them at all. We can see that using computer science that the zebrafish has almost 10 times the information content. We have not even begun to understand what that information content is. But we can say, by observing the zebrafish, we know, as marine explorers know, that it has far more complicated lifestyle. It does many more complicated things. And so one of the biggest failures is to stop wondering, to say that we think that the science can answer all questions. That's not true. There's an author that I really like, Clive Lewis, C.S. Lewis. He basically said that when science asks a question that the science can't answer, for example, how do migratory birds find a way home? How do they find a way to warm places? There are butterflies that migrate across continents and go to the exact same place. They've never been there before, right? It's just astounding that they can retain that information and actually go there. When science doesn't understand, they say, oh, it's instinct. What is instinct? We don't know what instinct is. We really don't. I think that science should really be more humble and really start looking at the ways to approach this problem in a different way, because there's no way with the brute force methods that we use now we'll be able to understand anything about genomes, much less the RNA and all these other things that are involved. I'm confident that we'll discover more factors, more important things that completely change the way we look at this, right? Again, the previous example was obvious. The body plan is more complex for the fruit fly. But in this case, it's the behavioral patterns, right? Because I think pufferfish is also a pretty beautiful creature, fairly complex and picturesque. But zebrafish has far more complicated lifestyle. And that's when you start looking, at different species, that there is some information content that drives it, but how it works, we don't know yet.